Hi, today I want to talk about dates and time zones. There's a big confusion about that topic. That's the reason we're talking about this today. Um, the reason is that people think that the date somehow is depending on the time zone, that the time zone is part of the date, but actually that's not true. Um, Taking this example, as you can see in this code, I have the function now that produces a daytime object for the current time, and then I call with the method get time. I get the internal of that object. When we see what this outputs, you see we just get a number. That number represents the time passed since the 1st of January 1970 in UTC. So it's just a time range. And that's in the core of a date object. That's all that's in that date object. Just time passed since 1st of January 1970. So nothing more, there's no time zone in it, nothing, as you can see. When we play around a little bit with that, we see I have create here. In that case, I create and I have not now. I create a date object that is for the 1st of January 1970 UTC. And I do the same. I'm just getting out the time, that time number. Execute that. You see we get 0. So 0 milliseconds passed since 1st of January 1970. So that's simply all. Going on. Again, we have a date object for the 1st of January, and we simply dump out that object and we get the time zone, the environment time zone of my installation. Doing that, you see I get 1 a.m. That the reason for that is when it was midnight in London UTC, it is in my time zone, it is 1 hour further, so it's 1 a.m. So that's the reason I have 1 a.m. That's the same time, so it's not 1 hour more, it's the same time, it's simply not a local time. So when I output a date object, it gets converted to a string to represent on the screen. And when it converts that date object, it makes that based on the environment time zone, what in my case is Europe Zurich, what is 1 hour more than UTC. So dates when they get converted, the time zone is used to convert that date to a local time, but the date itself has no time zone information. When we go on, I do the same, again the same date, and then I change the time zone. First, I change it to Pacific time zone, Mountain, Central, Eastern, all your US time zones. When I output that, you see I get different local times. So, and all is 1 year further, because of course when it was the 1st of January midnight in UK, it was still the old year in the US. So you see the local time is different, but of course it's the same time. It's just a different time zone representation of the same date object. So we don't change the date object. It's always the same. We just change the local time. every function in Lucee, we can set the time zone for the environment, as you have seen before with the set time zone, but also every date time function in Lucee that converts a date from something to a date or from a date to something has the possibility to set a time zone with that function. So in that case, I convert a date object to a string. Datetime format creates from a date object a string. So and I define different time zones with the function itself, not in the environment. The environment doesn't change, but the function gets different time zone information. When I execute this, you see again, I get the same output as before, different time zone, different local time for the same datetime object. So datetime object doesn't change, only the time zone used to convert to a string change. Here's another example. I again have there are different ways, you see, that I do different ways to create a date based on local information. That's again, I say I make me that date with that UTC or by parsing a local date. Doesn't matter. And in that case, I convert the date object to a number that represents the day of that date. So it's already, again, a conversion to a number with the time zone definition. When I execute that, you see I get different numbers. In the US, it was still the old year, and in Europe, it was already the new year. So local representation of the date is different, but the date object is the same. So where we convert date objects to strings, there are different use cases for that. For example, when we create a JSON string, then from a date object, of course, that is also a string then, so it means also the date is converted. When we have, I know that's not a lot used, but it's still an example. So when we do a WebEx file, we convert it also to a string. To the last one, I will come later. So when we execute that, you see, first of all, I simply output the date. So you see, I have the timestamp string that has no time zone information. I just see the local time, in that case, US Pacific, and no time zone information. The JSON string has time zone information. I see here the time zone offset is part of the string. That's a difference to ACF Cold Fusion, because ACF Cold Fusion doesn't have the time zone information, but JSON supports this format, and especially in JSON, it's very important because you pass JSON strings along servers, and servers can have different time zone. So just having a local time is not very helpful, because when we have servers in different time zone, they will interpret that time zone string based on their local time zone. So that could impact on the time zone itself. With WebEx, again, you see we have time zone information in the WebEx file itself. So we have the offset. In that case, it always makes the output the UTC with the UTC offset. But still, that doesn't matter what time zone is used, what offset is used, because the date is no longer local based. And it is still local based, sorry, but it's clear what time zone offset we have. So going back to the script, as you saw here, that the timestamp you use for data sources doesn't have time zone information. But there's a way to change that. When we that's a hidden feature. When we set timestamp with TS offset to true, and we output it again, we have the time zone information with the timestamp. But the problem is most data sources do not support that. So it will break. We do a query, and in that query I pass a string, date object that's then converted to a timestamp string, and we pass that to this data source, what is a MySQL data source, and we then simply output that the result. You see the timestamp passed has no time zone information. So then what happens in that case? The MySQL server will interpret that timestamp based on his local and environment time zone. That can differ from the time zone we have defined in the Lucee installation. Maybe the server is in a different place, so that can be different. To counteract that, we have added a feature to Lucee that you can define a time zone. That's the time zone you use for the server. So let's say we go the server is somewhere in America. Then I can set a different time zone. When I set that, what happens is that within the CF query tag, Lucee changes the environment time zone, and we get a different timestamp that should match the local time of the server. So if you know for sure that your server is a different time, your data source server is a different time zone, change that setting. The reason we do that this way is that there's no way with JDBC, the interface for interacting with databases, to pass a time zone information. So we have that to do this way. Another solution would be to, as I did show before, that we pass the time zone information as part of the timestamp, but that's not supported in most cases. So some databases support that. For example, Teradata supports that just fine. So if it's supported, you can define the. Give me a sec. You can define the following function in the driver of the data source. The driver is located in your installation under Lucee server context admin db driver MySQL. So you simply search for MySQL in that case, or mssql.cfc, and you will find it. There you can add that function, literal timestamp with TS offset. Set to true, it will add the time zone information to the time stamp. So when I store that, now I have this function added that returns true. Then I go to the admin. It has to, the admin has to pick up that change. So literal timestamp with TS offset true. I store that. Now the time zone should be part of the time stamp in case of a MySQL day, or in case of that MySQL data source. So when I go back, You see, I get an exception because Lucee does not accept that timestamp. Or sorry, not Lucee. MySQL does not accept it. You see, the select statement has changed. Now there is the offset, but that doesn't work. So changing back, setting it to false. Maybe a future version of MySQL will support it. In that case, we will enable it for future versions. But at the moment, for MySQL, it's disabled. So again, going to the admin, update it so it takes the change. Always it's not here yet. Okay. It's only there if it's true, otherwise it's not shown. Okay, to refresh it. Again, it's working, but the time zone information is gone. So the only thing with MySQL, the only thing you can do is to set time zone for the data source when it's different, or make sure, maybe the better option is to make sure that your application server and your data source are running in the same time zone. Okay. To understand time zones are really just a formatting option, a formatting rule. So you define how to format a date based on the local time zone. You can compare that with local information. You see, I have here the ls currency format function that converts a number to a local currency based string output. So I define two different locales. In one case, that's German Switzerland or English US. When I output this, you see I get different outputs for Swiss francs or US dollar. The delimiter here is the same, but that could also be different for other locales. So the output really depends on the local itself. Same for the date. So going back, you see I have find the local US Hawaii or Pacific Tahiti, and that changed the output. In that case, the time is the same, but the time zone name is different. So it's really the date, like the number, is always the same. It doesn't change. It's really just changed the output that is produced. Now coming to a big no-no. In Lucee has the function date convert. That function only exists for one reason, for compatibility reason to ACF. We warn in the documentation that you never should use that function, because it gives a wrong impression that the time zone is part of the date. So we have again a date, then we say date convert from local time to UTC time. So that one is already UTC, but as we know, that doesn't matter. Date has no time zone information, but base it on that function. You should assume that we already have UTC, so the date doesn't change. Even I do it multiple times, it never changes. It is already UTC. You see, the date does change a lot. We see we have from here to here, we have 12 hours change. So even we only say change it from local to UTC, what it does, it simply subtracts the difference from local to UTC from the date itself. So it changed the date. what is wrong, because time zone has nothing to do with the date itself, and it does it all the time because there is no because it doesn't know that, okay, it is that is already UTC. I don't have to do anything, and we see that misunderstanding with that function over and over again, because people think, okay, I have now changed and make a UTC date, or I make a local basic date, and that's actually not true. So conclusion, never ever use date convert. If you have date convert, remove it and replace it with other functions. It's easy to replace in most cases. And maybe we'll do another video that shows how to replace date convert. I have some concrete examples of code that was broken because of using date convert and how we changed the code. I maybe will make later a video about that. I hope this video was helping. Have a good one.